Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Josh Schimmels, publisher and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Journal. I'm excited to be here hosting our 5th annual Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Symposium. We appreciate you all taking a break from chasing leprechauns here on St. Patrick's Day. Thank you so much. Today's panel discussions will serve as part 1 of the series, with part 2, our awards, being held next week. Next Wednesday, we're going to be recognizing the companies and the leadership driving change and making an impact to their organizations and throughout the communities. Today, we're going to focus on discussion. We're going to talk about how diversity, inclusion, and equity affects the growth and success of businesses and their employees. We've created 3 outstanding panels to provide perspective, share viewpoints, and build a strong case for the need to continue to affect change. In just a moment, our first panel, which is entitled The Masterclass on Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, is going to help to lay the groundwork. They're going to better define what it is, what it means, and of course, why it's important. Our second panel will then focus on growth within an organization and within the community. And then lastly, our third panel will bring it all together. And we're going to learn about what successful business leaders are doing within their organizations to assess, to impact, and to create cultures that don't just embrace change, but absolutely thrive on it. I want to thank those of you who submitted questions throughout the registration process. It always helps to shape our conversations, and we were able to incorporate many of them into our panels today, so thank you. Also, feel free to use the chat function here to ask additional ones that you may have. I want to point out that throughout each of the sessions, we're going to be conducting live audience poll questions. So when you see these pop up on your screen, we'd love for you to provide your responses and your feedback, and then we'll publish these results online next week on our website, and that's labusinessjournal.com. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to thank our amazing sponsors, not just for their support of the program here today, but really all that they continue to do in our community of business. We thank them for the heavy involvement in the content today, their investment of time and energy, and also in joining us next week, honoring greatness in diversity, inclusion, and equity with our awards program. So a huge thank you to our 2 diamond sponsors. First, HNTB and Wells Fargo. Many thanks to each of our platinum sponsors as well: AMS Fulfillment, CSUN, DBS Bank, LA Care Health Plan, One Legacy, Quigley Simpson, and RSM. And of course, thank you to all of our gold sponsors: Austin Commercial, Children's Bureau, Clark Construction Group, Hub International Insurance, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Marathon Petroleum Corporation, Rework Work, and SoCal Gas. Thank you all so much. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you. And also thank you for recognizing the importance of this program. Many of you have come back to us year after year. All right, we're going to get right into this now. So it is my honor to introduce our very first panel. Please welcome Candy Lewis, Chief Executive Officer with Positive Results Center; Teresa Maxwell, DBE Compliance Manager with Skanxa USA; Ken Wiseman, Chief Workforce Development Officer, AMS Fulfillment; Renee Young, co-founder with Quigley Simpson; and today's moderator, Dr. Lois Shelton, Professor of Management at the CSUN David Nazarian College of Business and Economics. Dr. Shelton, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Shelton, you may still be on mute.
Yes. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am thrilled to be a part of this panel and to be moderating. It's been proven that diversity, inclusion, and equity is a power that improves revenues, increases profits, and fosters innovation. So we're going to get started with some of the foundational principles of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And as a part of this masterclass, I have our first question, which is a definition of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So in each of your own words, I would like each of the panelists to define diversity, inclusion, and equity. What does it mean with you? We can start with Candy.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was having a little difficult time unmuting. Hi, everyone. So, diversity. That's when you bring people from different backgrounds, communities, ethnicities, genders, and orientations together. And inclusion is when everyone is heard. When you bring everyone together and they have an opportunity to give input and you accept that input and use that input, that's inclusion. And then equity is when there's the fair and reasonable opportunities for everyone to be equal. And we know that everyone's not going to be equal, but there's different ways that we could do that. And it is usually through uplifting the voices of the people that are at the table, bringing different people to the table. Everyone should not look alike. They shouldn't come from the same community or have the same thoughts. That's my definition.
Oh, thank you, Candy. How about you, Teresa?
I love what Candy said, and you know, to lead on to that, for me personally, you know, having all those people at the table, I want to, you know, it's caring for others. That's what diversity, inclusion, and equity means to me. It's listening to those voices that Candy said should all be there. And so that's for me personally. And for Skanska, you know, we have 4 main values, and one of them is care for life, but another one is how we're better together. And, you know, we're building bridges, we're building subways, but what's important to us is that we're building up a community in which we are, you know, building these iconic structures. And so for me, it means really working myself out of a job. I hope one day that, you know, you don't need me helping to find diverse subcontractors. So that's what it means for me.
Wonderful. So we have caring for others, a variety of persons and talents. Ken, how would you like to add to this?
Ken, I think you're on mute as well.
There we go. It was hidden there for a second. Excuse me. Am I on now? Okay. I don't see my picture up.
And you are live. You're good to go.
Okay. Diversity is when by your own choices or your good fortune, you have managed to build a company that is meeting the needs of underserved community, and that balance that you have at least mimics the general population in which you live in or for the population you serve. When I think of equity, I think of, you know, as a company, sometimes it's wonderful to pick up a survey, perhaps of how engaged your employees are, and be so proud that you're doing very well, or be very proud of the fact that you have very little turnover. But equity is when, instead of just sitting on your successes, you actually pick up the surveys and read about the ones that were struggling. And you start defining your programs on what you're going to do and achieve, not only by your successes, but perhaps some of the folks that are being marginalized and hidden from view by your successes. When I think of inclusion, I think of not being the person that is on the gym floor hoping that they're going to be chosen for a team and just waiting. Instead, I think about an employee who wakes up in the morning and is excited to get to work because they know that their thoughts are going to be respected. They know they're going to be valued as a part of the team, and that makes them feel included and welcomed.
Wonderful, wonderful. Renee?
Hi. Well, you know, to me, Dr. Shelton, it really means just creating an environment that is welcoming and engaging. And I mean, if you really look at it, I like to use the example of a pie. I mean, you have, let's say you have all these great ingredients. You know, you've got flour, you've got eggs, you've got milk, you've got water, you've got apples. But when you like combine everything together, you've got something really amazing. And I think, you know, for a business to really succeed, you've got to create an environment where people can be their most authentic self. And I think you know, what's important really is, I mean, when people pull into the parking space or go up your elevator floors, or, you know, in the case of today when we're, you know, working from our spare bedrooms, you know, people really need to feel, you know, recognized, heard, and they're really contributing to moving the business forward. And I just, it's a hugely critical piece to really making a business truly successful.
Oh, I agree. I mean, what's wonderful about those answers is that our expert panelists sort of brought it to a micro level for the individual employee, and then they showed how it impacts the community, how you mirror your community, and that leads to increased business and organizational success. Okay, so our next step would be diversity, inclusion, and equity is about change. And so before change can happen, it's important to understand where you're starting from. So Ken and Candy, I'm going to ask you all, what was the most profound step that your organization has taken to show its commitment to creating the diverse, equitable, and inclusive community? In other words, tell us, how did you get started?
I can start.
Yes.
This is Ken. Okay. So for us, while we've had a very diverse environment, inclusive environment for many years, the murder of George Floyd caused a storm of emotions that impacted everyone in our company. This was not a storm that you could take out your umbrella and wait for it to pass. This was a storm where you needed to walk out into the storm and feel the fury, feel the need for change. The storm marked a time in our history where words were no longer enough. There was a need for this commotion to not stop. There was a need for all our associates to understand that this would not be over until we truly had addressed the issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Voices must be heard. So we scheduled our march for change on June 11th. We made signs, we hyped up our march, and close to 300 of us left at 11 a.m. and closed down our warehouses and joined together in a march from our 4 Santa Clarita Valley buildings, and we all converged on one building as one family. We had cleared 10,000 square feet of open space, chairs distance, masks on, bag lunches at the seat of the chair, and we had speakers. We had a lunch, and when it was done, before our associates marched back to their buildings, waving their signs and yelling out with the CHP and the Sheriff's Department sirens going and supporting us, the last thing that I said to everyone as we got up to do that last part of our march was, going forward, acceptance of a diverse and inclusive workplace will be a condition of being in this family. And
Wow.
so intensified our journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. Candy?
Thank you. So our journey started back in 2008 when I took over the company. I came from corporate America, and I decided that if I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. And so I started looking at me. What was my commitment? So every company has a mission and a vision, but the leader should also have their own mission and vision and commitment. And so the next thing I needed to do was to go out into the community and talk to the community. It wasn't about what I wanted, it was about what the community needed. So I did a needs assessment. We did talk sessions where we got the input and the feedback from the community. And then when we decided what we really were going to do, then we selected people from the community. That included the youth, that included seniors and parents and educators and providers. It also included those who had re-entered the community, so that we would lift up every voice. It is not about one voice. It is in order for your organization to be really focused on the needs of the community and then make sure that there's diversity and inclusion and equity, you've got to bring everyone to the table. And so we've been doing that from the very beginning. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't solely focused on one person or what we thought. And an organization that is going to serve the community must talk to the community and get the community involved, and that's everyone. That's what we did.
Oh, great. And what's wonderful about both of those answers involved engaging with the community. And on one hand, we heard from an organization that was a little bit more established. On the other hand, we heard from an organization that was starting from the beginning with the diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts. That's wonderful. Now, Renee, we'd like to hear from you. How important are your human resource professionals in your company's diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts?
Well, HR is just mission critical when it comes to ensuring that diversity can flourish. And I mean, I really think that it starts with your HR folks and your hiring managers really understanding unconscious bias. And I highly suggest when you can do unconscious bias training. I think sometimes what happens is businesses, they hire who they most relate to. And when we do that and we perpetuate the problem with really being a diverse organization. And I really think that if you always hire the right person for the job and you have zero unconscious bias, you will come out with the perfect mix of your talent pool. But I mean, make no mistake. I mean, the front lines of your business door is HR, and you've got to get that part right. It's critically important. So they play a huge role. And I think when you combine those two, that's powerful, and that's where you get the mix. I mean, I also think that, frankly, I mean, we're all really blessed to be in Los Angeles because our talent pool is, first of all, amazing, and second of all, extremely diverse. So I think that when you can really get that right, you can have an incredible organization.
Oh, I would agree. So once you commit to make the change, then you go into getting your correct workforce together. And that's one of the things that CSUN is very strong in. We have a very diverse student body, very diverse alumni body, and they're also very well trained in working in teams and working with diverse groups. Okay, so now that we have that in place, our next step would be metrics. How do you measure diversity, inclusion, and success in an organization? What metrics should be established? And Teresa, can you link these metrics to business success?
I'm glad I got the numbers question. I don't know if it's because I work with engineers every day, but we have a lot of metrics in our compliance department. We love our numbers, but yes, they're important. I think everyone knows if you don't have a goal, whether it's in personal or business, you're never going to reach it, right? Because you didn't set that goal. And for Skanska, we're lucky we work in the public works industry. So a lot of times our projects come with a goal already set for us. And we measure kind of two things towards that goal, right? We tend to measure every month, how much have we awarded towards that goal, which means how many, small minority and women-owned subcontractors have we brought onto the project to meet that goal? And also how much have we paid them towards that goal? So we do that every month on every project. But what really is important is that action plan to meet that goal and coming up with metrics that aren't just dollars. So for an example, in Los Angeles, we have a regional connector project with Metro, and our goal, let's just say it's 200 million, right? So we want to spend 200 million on small minority and women-owned subcontractors. So yes, we've got our metrics where we're making sure we award enough, making sure we're spending enough towards that goal, but we're also measuring, how many, new subcontractors have we participated in matchmaking with other contractors, not just me, but even our competitors, right? How many training sessions have we participated in or hosted ourselves to help build up these small contractors so that they can grow their businesses and work on not just our projects, but other projects, and when it comes to our workforce, how many have we sponsored from the local community into the unions so that they're not just getting a job, but they're getting a career with benefits? And so, yes, trying and having those, big goals are so important for you to set, and those metrics are important, but for me, I think to measure it against, a successful business, you need to make sure you have that action plan and you come up with ways to measure those efforts. And yeah, it's always great to be able to see the success and you know, try and write up stories about people that you've helped. But yeah, the metrics are very important.
Right. And what you've done, Teresa, you've explained that metrics go beyond simply counting the numbers, but moving into metrics involving engagement, training, and growth of businesses. And so we've talked about the need for change, the importance of human resources in starting it, and then the set of metrics to measure it. Now we want to go and sort of look at some of the results here. Ken, can you talk to us about some of the things that AMS has changed since this commitment has become rooted in your company's DNA?
Let's first just talk about that DNA a bit to give you a background. So about 6 years ago, we recognized that a lot of the folks that we had working for us from underserved communities weren't applying for promotional opportunities. And we really dug into that to try to understand what is going on here. What could we do to help these folks proceed with their careers? And we opened a 2,500 square foot learning center. And we started partnering with our community college and other agencies to bring in courses to help everything from ESL to resume and interview skills. And we started working on helping our folks. And that had gone a long way. We became a B Corp. A B Corp is described as the only certification that measures a company's entire social and environmental performance. There's only 3,500 B Corps in the world. But as we got into the DE&I area and the intensity in which we needed to embrace this, we realized that all of this was not enough. We still needed to do more. And we leaned back on the playbook that took our company from, say, an average safety record to perhaps one of the best safety records in our industry. And that playbook was very simple. And this is what we are following in terms of our DE&I efforts. First of all, employees need to hear the commitment from senior leadership. They need to hear it directly, and they need to know the company is committed towards working on this. Second of all, employees need to hear what are the right behaviors that our company expects from all our leaders and our employees. And then finally, employees then need to know what to do if those standards are not being met. And how can we empower them to speak up? And so we have greatly increased the number of leadership. We have a general leadership course called I Want to Be a Leader. And then we have an advanced leadership class for our current leaders. And in that I Want to Be a Leader, we talk about all of the principles and of our company and how we expect that our leadership should be working with them. And for the first time in my career, employees always love doing role playing where you're working through conflicts and giving them a chance to sort of act it out. And all my role playing has always been, okay, you're a leader and you're going to be talking to this employee about. Well, we have flipped that. Now we have employees, we're talking to them about how they approach their manager, how they knock on that door, how they try to read for body language, how they approach and sit down with their manager and tell them that something's not feeling comfortable to them, and make them understand that we're empowering them to do that. And then in our advanced leadership classes, we're telling our leaders to listen. We're telling them that they have this opportunity to start engaging in change in our company and that they need to listen. And we found that with this approach, we get a lot more dialogue going and we can make change with this approach.
Oh, wonderful. So there you've got training at various levels in the organization, from the junior to the senior, plus you're engaging with outside organizations. It was music to my ears to hear you had engaged with some of your universities, because CSUN is certainly we consider ourselves a great partner for organizations who want to improve their DE&I goals there.
And we've had interns from CSUN.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so now let's think about what we're thinking about in terms of the end goal here. So Candy, can you tell us what a culture of inclusion is?
Absolutely. So every business in order for them to be successful, they have to have a direct understanding of your company's leadership, the talent, the skills, and the benefits. And having a diverse staff that is actively engaged in the leadership and in the conversation, that's how you have a culture of inclusion. So let me just bring that full forward. So every organization has internal and external customers. Your internal customer is your employees, your team, and your staff member. Think about the words that you're using. Are you calling them employees? Are you calling team members or staff? Because that makes them feel like they're included in the process. Are you bringing them to the table? Are you actively engaging them? Because what you need to understand, when you bring in a diverse group, you're now bringing in a unique and empathetic voice that has a real pulse on the stated and unstated needs of the community. If you do not have a very diverse employee team or staff, then you're only looking at one level, and then that is just usually the stated needs for someone. For instance, in our organization, we focus on domestic violence, sexual assault, bullying. And people don't come to us and say, I've been in an abusive relationship. They come to us and say that they're hungry, or that their kids need help, or maybe that they need housing. But because we then talk to them and we really understand what their needs are, then we get down to the bottom. But because we've empowered our team to really to be leaders themselves and to make sure that their voices are heard, because your bottom line team, they know exactly what's going on. So in order for you to have a culture of inclusion, you must engage every one of the members of your team, because they are your customers. When you treat them right, when you give them the tools and the skills, when you allow them to lift up their voices, to be heard, and to have a say-so in the leadership and the direction of the company, you then build a culture of inclusion.
Right, wonderful. And empowering everyone moves the whole organization forward.
Absolutely.
I want to address this next question to both Teresa and Renee. How do you extend diversity outreach outside of your organization? Has there been ways that your business had provide opportunities for underserved groups, whether in your workforce or in other business plans?
So one thing that has been highly successful for us has been setting up your own supplier diversity program. And we actually learned this from two of our clients, actually, Procter & Gamble and JP Morgan Chase. And when you do this, you are really looking at your own supply chain, and when you're sourcing for, and I mean, if you think of what any typical business has, I mean, office supplies, travel, it could be HR, IT, we have a myriad of suppliers. So what we have done, and it's so easy for businesses to do, is to really go out and engage with the certifying organizations like WBENC, NMSDC, there are local ones, there's national ones, and really take a look at this diverse pool of businesses out there, women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, LGBT, disability-owned. I mean, there's a vast amount of potential suppliers. And when you do this, you actually bring these folks into your own culture, because your team is then interfacing with all of these different organizations. And I mean, statistics have proven time after time that diverse companies very often outperform non-diverse companies. And so I think it's a very easy way to get started. And it's been highly successful for us. And what it really does at the end of the day, it just gives your team and these different cultures and organizations a way to really connect and interact and really engage with each other. And it's been really successful. So I highly encourage it when you can.
Wonderful. Teresa?
Oh yes, you know, one way that we've engaged outside of our organization is to share our values, and you know, also being on panels like the Los Angeles Business Journal is hosting today, and communicating outside our organization is so important to learn what barriers there may be to, you know, potential subcontractors or workers coming in and working for us. And, you know, a big way for us recently in construction, you know, women are underutilized, whether it's, you know, out in the field as a craft worker or it's as a business owner working as a subcontractor. Women in construction are underutilized. So we, you know, do a lot of outreach and efforts outside to try and, you know, identify what barriers or ways we could support these women-owned companies and also women into the trades. And to help, you know, support that sharing of our values, last week was Women in Construction Week, and we wrote a letter. Each of our project executives sent a personalized letter to our craft workers that are females and told them, you know, we appreciate their work on the job. We've had, you know, X number of females have built this job so far, and you have done this many hours. So really helping to build up them and let them know, you know, we see them out there. And what we did to help share that value with our subcontractors is we kind of shared a template. And even if they didn't use our template memo, the fact that we sent that out there, we hope it got them thinking of ways that they could acknowledge their female craft workers. And so that was one way that we really tried to encourage outside, you know, what we do, diversity and inclusion with our subcontractors.
Wow. We've covered some great ground here, from how to work DE&I internally within your organization and how to reach out to organizations within the community and community members. We're going to have to, due to time constraints, we're going to have to skip to our last question here. And so I'd like to ask each of our panelists to discuss the following. I mean, how would you rate the success and impact of efforts that you've seen to increase DE&I awareness and action over the past year? And if you like, you can rate this on a scale from 1 to 10. We'll start with you, Candy.
Thank you, Dr. Shelton. So I'm going to rate it at 5. It's been a long time coming. We need to include diversion, inclusion, and equity into every workplace across the world. We do not have enough women in leadership positions. We do not have enough Black women in leadership positions. We do not have enough people of color all across the board. We do not have enough youth, and we also do not have enough people who are returning to the community who have served their time, and they are outstanding people to bring to the community. So I think I'm going to go with 5 because I am seeing some increase, but it's very small if you look at it over the history. And so we definitely need to do more. There needs to be more focus on making sure that everyone is brought to the table to have the conversations, and not just brought to the table and just left there. We need to make sure that they're given the skills and the tools. It is not enough for an organization to hire you and bring you in and say, you have the job. People need to understand, because people come from different backgrounds and skill sets. There may need to be a learning curve, and that is where the leadership comes in and the managers come in to make sure that the team understands. So make sure that they're given the skills and the tools, that there is a clear communication, and that there is a plan for success. That way, everyone will be able to meet those goals. And if you give them some goals, something that they can be held accountable to, then they're able to work towards that. So my answer is 5.
Okay, Teresa.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with a 5 on success, but impact, you know, I almost want to say 10, just because I want to continue the conversations I've been hearing. I think it's so important that equity has been, you know, included in this conversation. Years ago, you never heard that word. D&I was it. That's all anyone really talked about was the importance of diversity and inclusion, but equity is so important. So I do think what I'm seeing happen around us, I want to keep it going. And so to me, it's successful that we're having these exciting conversations. And I love everything my fellow panelists are saying, and I'm writing notes here. So I want to give it a 10, but the success, like Candy mentioned, they're still underutilized, that we're still not seeing, equity all around us. And so a 5 is a fair number.
Okay. Renee?
Well, okay, I'm going to give it a 6. And here's why. Because if I look at it over the last year, I'm encouraged by the fact that the Chief Diversity Officer is one of the most sought after positions right now. And that's really encouraging to me. I mean, the percentage increase is vast. So I think that that is a really positive step in what's happening in particularly larger corporations and really medium-sized companies as well. And also I think it's only been a few years now, but I'm also encouraged by this, that in terms of diverse businesses, you had WBENC, women-owned businesses, and you had NMSDC, which is minority-owned businesses. And now included in those certifying bodies is LGBT, there is veteran-owned, and there is disability-owned. And I think that is, this is increasing the platform. And I do feel we're not there yet by any means. We have to keep having these conversations. We have to keep doing these panels. We have to keep having really open and sometimes difficult conversations, but we've got to move forward. And I feel like in the last year we've gained a little ground, a little bit.
Okay. And Ken, you want to close us out?
Sure. If we hadn't been in this effort to work with the underserved community for 5 or 6 years, I might not say that I think we might be at a 7 or an 8. I do think we're there, but if you ask me again in 2 months where we're at, if I don't have a whole list of things we've done in that 2 months, then we're back to a 4 or 5, because this is a dynamic process. And every time I teach, I want to be a leader or advanced leadership, I get lots of feedback from the employees who are participating, and we need to keep making change with everything we learn. And that's what inspires our employees to know that this is a company that's embracing change, when they're constantly showing they're listening and they're making those adaptations and changes as the opportunities arise.
Wow, this was a power-packed session. I want to thank each of the panelists. There was so much good information here. And I also want to thank LABJ on sponsoring this. It was a delight to moderate. And I will now hand it back over to Josh.
Well, thank you so much. What an outstanding way to start things off today. Thank you for a great initial discussion. Thank you, Dr. Shelton, Candy, Teresa, Ken, and Renee. We're going to move right into our second panel, which is entitled Growth, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, Why It Matters. So please welcome for our second panel, Tiffany Jones, Production and Community Engagement Lead at One Legacy, Olga Myra Lopez, Senior Representative, Strategic Business and Construction Careers with Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Tony Tavares, District 7 Director at Caltrans, and today's moderator, Abigail Sanchez, VP Government Relations Director, West Division with HNTV Corp. Thank you for being here, and welcome, Abigail.
Thanks, Josh. A pleasure to be here. We just had a chance to listen to our panel, our first panel, setting the stage for us, and now we're going to the next part of the process. We're going to talk about personal involvement and mentorship. The first question for this group as well is around growth. We're talking about in this panel, the growth, inclusion, and equity that it takes us to get there. In your own words, what's the significance of growth, the growth aspect of growth, inclusion, and equity? Tiffany?
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you for having me on this panel today. I think it's very important, and as a nonprofit that saves lives through organ, eye, and tissue donation, diversity and inclusion is paramount. And truthfully, it's at the core, or it should be at the core of every conversation, because without diversity and inclusion, or without growth, there's no diversity and inclusion. Most importantly, the willingness for people to grow. Organizations and individuals can grow, obviously, if they embrace the principles that are inherent in diversity and inclusion, but growth has to be at the forefront, because that's what actually pushes inclusion forward. It pushes individuals out of their comfort zones, and it allows them to support the change that is needed to be a more inclusive and diverse organization. So growth is very paramount, and it should be at the top of every conversation that includes diversity and inclusion.
I agree. We're going to go right into Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Abigail. And it is an honor and pleasure also to be part of this panel and this discussion this afternoon. I would like to just start out by saying how pleased and fortunate I am to be able to work for an organization that not only embraces, but has implemented processes that ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion are part of our daily operations, part of our culture. When we evaluate my current organization here in Los Angeles, our demographics are very diverse. I think one of our panel members from the previous discussion mentioned that we are very fortunate to live and work in Los Angeles, where we do have some amazing talent, as well as a very diverse group of talented employees. And I currently oversee 3,000 employees, and roughly 80% of those employees associate themselves with races other than white. So we are a very diverse organization. But I will say the challenges we have all been facing over the past year with the COVID-19 pandemic, the civil unrest that we've all witnessed, has really heightened our awareness of the issues of systemic racism and the lack of equity in this country. And it also allowed us to reaffirm our belief that equity must not only be a word that we use, but implemented into our practices and culture. And I truly believe in order for any organization or business to grow, evolve, and to continue to be relevant and successful in the 21st century, our employees must not only be a cross-section of the communities that we serve, but must also be a voice for these communities and represent their values. And so some of the things that we're doing at Caltrans essentially is redeveloping and evaluating our recruitment, hiring, and retention plans, and ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion are the backbone of those plans. And this will assist our organization in continuing to be relevant and significant in the transportation sector.
And Tony, I can't imagine what it's like to try to manage and make sure that you have inclusion with 3,000 employees, but it sounds like Caltrans is a great plan. And with you at the helm, I'm sure it'll be achieved. Olga, we're going to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. It's also a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. At Metro, we encourage small businesses to start with small subcontracts in the beginning. It's our duty to follow it. It's often the back office requirements that are the most difficult. Metro will sit with a losing bidder and review their strengths and their weakness down to their staff expertise to help grow capabilities. You would be surprised how seldom small businesses take advantage of that service that we offer. We provide this kind of example for businesses that in the past had no chance of success with us. This is one way in how we work to grow our diverse pool for work on our Metro projects. Thank you.
And I know that you certainly have your hands full, Olga, and doing a great job to serve all of the businesses of every size.
Thank you.
Tony, I have a question for you. When we're thinking about Caltrans and equity, and how does Caltrans view equity? And then furthermore, how do you engage in equity? What does that look like? Can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you, Abigail. I'd have to say, obviously, as I mentioned, the events that really transpired over the past year really brought a lot of heightened attention to our senior level management team. And so we really began with a series of internal discussions with our senior level team. We actually watched several videos such as Divided Highways and Segregated by Design. We held town hall discussions with all of our employees, really listening to them, but also educating them along the way, which led to our department developing our first ever equity statement that has been put out to the public. And basically it acknowledges that communities of color and those underserved received fewer benefits and greater share of the negative impacts associated with the state's transportation system. So we acknowledge that some of our past transportation decisions have created harm to these communities of color and disadvantaged. And we also, with our equity statement, created a pillar of what we call the 4 Ps, in which we guide our principles in equity. And the 4 Ps really stand for people, ensuring that we have a workforce at all levels of our organization that represent our communities that we serve. And the second P is program and projects, that we engage communities that are most impacted by structural racism by creating and implementing programs and projects that have positive impacts on their daily lives. So really having that engagement component with these communities. Our third P is partnerships, increasing those pathways to opportunity for businesses. And we've heard some discussion about small businesses, disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses, reaching out and encouraging more of that. And also pathways to opportunities for individuals who face systemic barriers to employment. So working in that space to remove those barriers for them. And then our fourth P refers to planet. So really combating the climate crisis that we're facing in this nation and California, and its disproportionate impact on our frontline and vulnerable communities. I'd also say too, because we created this equity statement, our team actually developed a new strategic plan. And we were very deliberate and intentional on how we impact people. And so our past strategic plans really focused on just the infrastructure that we maintain and operate and construct. Now we're really a people-focused strategic plan and how that infrastructure impacts people. It's our declaration basically of our vision and mission, our core values and our goals to deliver a world-class transportation system for one of the nation's most populous and innovative and diverse states. And our strategic plan is our first step in establishing Caltrans as a people-focused, as I said, socially conscious leader within the transportation sector. Basically, throughout this strategic plan and all of our policies and procedures that we're currently revising and redeveloping, equity is a dominant theme and specifically referenced in every part of those plans. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It sounds like Caltrans and Metro have a lot of similarities in terms of the partnerships of the people and the focus of including the community. Olga, you've spoken about the importance of small business in the past. Can you give us some examples on how Metro is providing opportunities for inclusion of small businesses?
Yes, Metro is committed to build a world-class transportation system, as the taxpayers of LA County have trusted us to do. In the most diverse county in the country, we have a pool of talent that was once overlooked. Metro uses the lens of equity to look at all our endeavors. We have an executive officer of diversity and inclusion that reports to the CEO to ensure that barriers to inclusion are called out and removed as possible. I work for the Diversity and Economic Opportunity Department, and we enforce goals for inclusion on contracts. We have an aggressive outreach team that shows small businesses how to work with Metro. And we even have a program to encourage small businesses to prime on contracts, and a medium-sized program to protect and shepherd small businesses as their income exceeds the limit of the small businesses designation. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And, in the healthcare organizations, we have small businesses and large providers as well. Tiffany, what are some ways within healthcare, and then for that matter, with any organization, that we can build a culture of diversity and inclusion within the workforce? What are some ideas that you have?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, I think it starts within first. And it's more than a PMP. It's more than a policy or a procedure. Organizations should absolutely have diverse workforce where employees are heard and they're empowered to use their own voices. This will improve outcomes ultimately. One, if your employees feel heard and valued because they're your brand ambassador, they are going to reflect the company that they work for, and they'll be your best advocate. But then you also have the external partners and stakeholders, and then particularly in healthcare that service every group, every individual that exists. We have to make sure that we're being reflective of all groups, that we're representing the communities that we serve. Think about it as simply as if you're walking down a hallway, what are those images on the walls that you see? Do they reflect you? Do they reflect your maybe your values? There are language barriers that we know that exist specifically in this diverse community, as Minnie has mentioned, of Los Angeles. And so, are we making sure that our marketing materials or materials in general speak the language as some of our communities? And so we need to make sure that we're, inclusive of all groups and that we're not overshadowing or looking out for one particular group. It's very important that all voices are heard and that everyone has a seat at the table. And I can say also, being over the public education department here at One Legacy, it's very important because we're always speaking outside of our echo chambers and talking to our communities and our members. Oftentimes, some of them look like me, some of them don't. And so we need to make sure that our staff reflects the members that we're engaging with outside of the communities. We talk with donor family members often. Because in organ donation, really, there are no color lines. We like to say that, all organs are pink. And so it transcends color lines. But how do individuals know that? How are they empowered or feel welcomed by the person that they're talking to is really what's going to determine the next step, oftentimes in their outcome from the patient care perspective. So it's very important that we reflect the communities we serve.
Tiffany, I'm so glad you mentioned education and community and others, because there's certainly not one organization can do or solve issues by themselves, and together we can make progress, which is ties into our next question. The cultivating alliances are important. I'd like to ask the group what your organizations are doing around the area of corporate and community partnerships to help further your mission and bring awareness around the challenges and the needs of our communities of color. And I'm going to start with Tony this time.
Thank you, Abigail. I think it begins first internally with our own organization and engaging our existing workforce on the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we have been holding several listening sessions and educating our employees, really discussing the difference between equity and equality. We're providing unconscious bias training to all of our employees. As I mentioned with our town hall discussions, having those discussions about the importance of having a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workforce, but also what the impacts of our past transportation decisions have been on several communities, especially those communities of color. We've also established a Office of Race and Equity within Caltrans to help us increase our engagement and involvement with all Californians. And we are having a very focused engagement right now with Indigenous communities, African American communities, and Latino communities, really looking to provide an understanding where people are in society, and also some of the how we as public servants can serve them better, making transportation decisions that are meaningful in their lives. As I mentioned, we're reworking our recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotional process internally, but that also works externally. And so we have a program called Pathways to State Service. And what we're doing is providing these opportunities of quality jobs in state service for white workers with high barriers to employment, including displaced workers, low income and individuals with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and single parents. So we're providing relevant job training and support to these individuals so that they're successful in obtaining a employment, a job with the state. We also have various partnerships with local organizations. We have an Adopt a School and youth mentorship programs where we mentor with various high school STEM programs for their engineering and mathematic fields. We mentor those school-age teenagers, also providing them other careers. If they don't want to go the college bound, there are careers as perhaps equipment in the equipment operation areas of maintenance and heavy equipment mechanics. Partnering with community colleges in developing curriculums with some of our local community colleges here in Southern California for various positions as construction inspectors, surveyors, and material testers. And we're really making a deliberate effort in recruiting at universities with diverse graduates and marketing and outreach using social media and other platforms such as LinkedIn. A few of the other things that we've been working with the communities is we've established a task force on homelessness. And this unsheltered task force is really taking an equitable approach to addressing our regional encampments from a holistic standpoint. And what we have been doing is partnering with a lot of local agencies, a lot of social service groups to find transitional housing and programs for these people experiencing homelessness. But also what we've been able to provide is a pathway to employment and careers with Caltrans through these programs. As these people are successfully completing these programs, we are providing them the opportunity to obtain a career with Caltrans and work for our organization. So we're trying to provide that full 360 turnkey, if you will, to assist these people. And then also, we have a program with various prisons throughout California where we are working with individuals who are soon to be paroled, helping them with the application process, helping them with careers with state service, and being support to them through that process. And I'll say we have been very successful in hiring several individuals from the California Institute for Women, as well as individuals from the California State Prison in Solano County. So these are just a few of the areas that we're working both internally and externally with our communities.
Tony, the things that I've taken away are understanding and service from a Caltrans point of view. Tiffany, and then Olga.
Certainly. So there is a lot obviously to be done. And so we're every day, working on fine tuning what that is and what that looks like. But definitely working with partners where we share ideas and resources as we continue to grow together. And just last month for Black History Month, we partnered with Livestream Blood Bank in the San Bernardino area. And we had a blood drive in honor of Black history, which was also joined by the Zeta Phi Beta International Historically African American Greek sorority. And there we were able to host the blood drive, but also share the importance message of organ, eye, and tissue donation. Transplants, right now, the transplant list, there's 109,000 people waiting for life-saving transplants. And then particularly in communities of color, they make up 60% of that list, although the communities of colors are often the minorities. And so there's a great need here. So what we were able to do during Black History Month was make aware some of the needs that were in the community. One, by hoping that they would also provide blood that could be life-saving for someone else, but then also consider organ, eye, and tissue donation, which could ultimately save a life as well. And so we are working with Livestream, the Zeta Phi Beta sorority. We also are working with Young Visionaries, which is a leadership academy in San Bernardino. And we partnered with them to provide essential meals and household needs for their families that were underserved in communities. We also are working with schools, particularly the student organization of donation advocacy group. And we're working with all of the schools to really train the students now at this point so they can be informed and aware about organ, eye, and tissue donation, because it ultimately, and many times, unfortunately, affects their families. It affects those communities in which they live in, and particularly, as I mentioned, in communities of color. So it's very important that we continue these efforts with the organizations that we're working with, and to make sure that we're bringing it to the forefront where people can understand it. I think that's what's most important, where we're not talking over your head about some of these matters that, ultimately affect you, but we're talking directly to you, and we want to hear from you. Another initiative that we've done most recently, we started our virtual town hall series last year in June, which is Men's Health Month. And we kicked it off with Dr. Rutland, and then also another doctor, educational doctor, who received a heart and kidney transplant. And it was very important that we did that for Men's Health Month, but also in June, right off the heels of everything that was happening with all of the unrest in our country, is that we had those two men representing the community that they serve, so people could hear from them and ultimately make better decisions in terms of their health care, in terms of their life decisions. That heart transplant and that kidney transplant that he now has, Robert Hill has to make sure that he's taking care of that. And so it's very important that with these town halls, that we're not just talking to the community, but we're engaging with the community. They're hearing from us and we're hearing from them. That's why we have those Q&A features, so we can take in questions and we can answer them in real time, providing them with the resources that they need. And we just had a town hall yesterday. This month is March, but it's National Kidney Month. And so we had Velma Skelterberry, who is the first African-American female transplant surgeon, on our panel yesterday. And we had a conversation with her. Her focus is particularly on kidneys, and being that this is Kidney Month, it was very important for communities of color to know how to take care of your health, how to, as what we call, know your numbers, get a full workup, make sure that you are being very cognizant of preemptive measures that you could potentially take to avoid maybe needing a transplant or taking care of yourself, so that way you and your family have a longer term at life. So these conversations are ongoing. Our town halls are monthly, and we're going to continue to engage with experts in the field of organ, eye, and tissue donation, so we can make it more of a everyday conversation, more of a normalized conversation, where it's not an end of life, but it's a conversation that you can have now that ultimately gives the gift of life.
Well, thank you. We're coming to a close. I could talk to you, three of you, all day. These are just fascinating things that you're all doing in your organizations to promote equity, inclusion, and growth in people and communities, and to save lives. I'm going to go to our final question and do a rapid fire and ask you to take 20 to 30 seconds to give me your thoughts on the following. Mentorship is such an important aspect of being and becoming a leader. And as a mentor, what is the most important lesson that you impart on your mentees about equity? I'm going with Olga first.
Thank you, Abigail. Potential mentees at Metro, they need to reach out beyond their comfort zone and not be afraid to seek mentors of different ethnicities for guidance. We encourage that they research a potential mentor and be sure exactly what you want to consider as the strengths you see in them and that you as a mentee want to grow in. We encourage that you be specific and do your homework on the issue you want improvements in. Determine what you bring to the table that can possibly help that potential mentor, like maybe network or relationships in the agency, like a Metro. Learn to accept no gracefully and keep looking. Ask for help for introduction to possible mentors. Use Metro events, workshops, Meriwether's, for example, and set a few minutes a day in your pursuit. Let us help you. You don't have to do this alone. I encourage all the small businesses that are participating today, if you're interested in learning more about how to do business with Metro, visit our vendor portal. It's metro.net/connect. Very easy to remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Tony?
Yeah, thank you. I think just to be quick here, I try to ensure that my mentee fully understands the difference between equity and equality, and the importance of equity not only being a framework, but being weaved through every fiber of our organization. I truly believe that all of us, that we must be intentional and we must commit to eliminating these barriers and really addressing the disparities that impact employees and others from reaching their full potential. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And Tiffany?
Yeah, thank you. Look, one of the things I most commonly do, I consistently tell people to use your voice. And you can do this verbally, and you can also do this through your skill sets. You know, let your work oftentimes speak for you. Overcoming, being persistent, breaking down walls and breaking down barriers. If you are confident in the work that you're doing, if you're using your voice to make sure that you're heard, and then that you're speaking up when you have that opportunity, that will take you a long way. And it will also make sure that you're heard. And this is part of that inclusion, you know, that we're talking about. So use your voice. I would ultimately say use your voice.
Tiffany, I would agree with that. And I agree with all of you. And I thank you for your time. I feel enriched. I feel inspired. And I can't wait to work with you offline. But in the time being, we're going to go back to Josh so that he can take us off to our next panel. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much to our second panel. Thank you, Abigail, Tony, Olga, and Tiffany. Appreciate all of your time and commitment that you put into this. You know, at this point, we heard the first panel sort of set the stage and talk about what it means and why it's important. Our second panel talked about community and the importance of mentorships and getting involved. Our last panel here and our last final panel here of the afternoon is going to focus on creating a culture and doing that through top leadership within an organization. So let's get right to it. We've got an outstanding panel that I'm really excited to hear from. So please welcome Dr. James Kyle, Medical Director, Quality, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with LA Care Health Plan, Ken Lee, Principal Risk Consulting and Los Angeles CDI Leader at RSM, Michael Ormond, Region Bank President, Wells Fargo Bank, and lastly, our moderator, Tom McCabe, Managing Director, US CEO with DBS Bank. Tom, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Los Angeles Business Journal, just great to have everyone here. We have a distinguished panelist, and we also welcome all of you joining on Zoom. Thanks for taking the time. I want to set the context for our discussion over the next 30 to 40 minutes using a quote from Verna Myers from the Myers Group. Verna's quote goes as follows: "Diversity is being asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is when the DJ plays your song request." Our panel today, skilled and very professional DJs when it comes to building organizational cultures and cultures that drive diversity and inclusion. They have over 80 years worth of leadership experience. So let's jump in and start with the questions. The first question I'd like all three panelists to answer if they would. And that question is, as you evaluate your own organization's D&I agenda, if you could give us a quick assessment of where you're at, your insights on what works, the successes and best practices. Dr. Kyle, we could start with you, and then we'll go to Ken and then to Michael. Dr. Kyle?
Thank you, Tom, and I'm happy to be here with this distinguished panel. When I look at LA Care, I think I'm fortunate that we have a top leadership team that is very devoted and very dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have been taking steps, certainly accelerated since the death of George Floyd, at guaranteeing for our members, for our staff and employees, and for the providers that are contract with us, that they all are experiencing both diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's been a real pleasure to work with that staff. So I would suggest that we are in good shape in terms of our progress. We have a long way to go, but we have a committed CEO and committed senior leadership team.
Thank you, Dr. Kyle. Ken, your thoughts?
Sure, thanks, Tom. And thank you to the LABJ for having me. Pleasure to be here, and a good afternoon to all the participants. And, you know, like Dr. Kyle said, I think when it comes to D&I, I think we're all in a work of progress stage, right? And, you know, at RSM, culture, diversity, and inclusion is a strategic priority, and it has always been a strategic priority for us, right? Along with all the other priorities that we have as a business, such as growth, et cetera. And so, you know, we attack culture, diversity, and inclusion in many ways, right? And tone at the top is very important. And I think from an organizational standpoint, we have a dedicated senior partner that runs the program on a national basis, right? And as a public accounting firm across the United States with multiple offices, we also have regional leaders, we have office leaders to ensure that we're driving the right messages, we're running the right programs, and we're setting the right tones at the local levels as well. But it's also the levels of investment that we've made across the 11 employee network groups that we have that represents all of the diverse groups that we have. We also invest quite a bit in training and education, right? And we've had a lot of discussions around all the events that have transpired over the past year. We have this program called Courageous Conversations at RSM. And, you know, we've kind of accelerated and have had a lot of ad hoc courageous conversations over the past year, given all the recent events. You know, for example, we've accelerated some discussions, courageous discussions, you know, around cultural dexterity, around unconscious bias, around racial intersectionality, and the like. You know, and also we support our employees, not just, you know, within RSM, but in the business community as well. So as a public accounting firm, we support diverse professional organizations such as ASCEN, which is the Asian Pan American Finance and Accounting Professionals. We support NABA, the National Association of Black Accountants, and ALPHA, Latino Professionals in Accounting. So I think that it's a work in progress. We've made a lot of good progress, but I think that the work is not done. And I think we have the right structures in place and we have the right investments in place. But I think our leaders need to continue to show that deep understanding, continue the level of investment, and also continue to be courageous in our conversations within our organizations, in all of the efforts we have around culture, diversity, and inclusion, you know, within our recruiting process, within our vendor management process, and the like. So a lot of work to be done, Tom.
Thank you, Ken. And Michael, your thoughts, please.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here with everybody, and thanks for tuning in today. At Wells Fargo, we embrace to promote diversity and inclusion in all aspects of our business, and it's an essential way of doing business, how we engage our employees and our customers. Because we're a bank, it's also really important we reflect who our clients are and the communities that we serve. So there's a strategic approach to how we hire, and having that reflection exist in the employees at a particular branch, for example, as to mirror those clients that are in that community, either by language, racial diversity, whatever it might be. And that's really specific all across the nation. There's different cultural pockets everywhere, as you know. And so that's a really important piece of the puzzle in the way that we do business as well. We launched last year in 2020 numerous efforts to create permanent change to our D&I structure at Wells Fargo. One is an extraordinary accountability to our operating committee members of diversity and inclusion goals specifically, but every employee has objectives in their annual performance reviews that tie back to diversity and inclusion as well. And last November, our CEO named a new head of DE&I named Kleber Santos, and he's been developing and growing his team since last November. And so there's, that's where we are today. And part of our journey ahead is there's great things to come. Developing a formal development program for talent that exists in the company today to ensure we're continuing to grow and cultivate that diverse talent that is here, as well as from externally as well. And then our team member networks. Those are called employee resource groups in a lot of other companies. We call them team member networks, but they really house a lot of the good local work within the different markets that we exist in that relates to DE&I for those local workplaces, but also in the communities that we serve locally. So it's a little bit about where we are and where we're going.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, I may stay with you. You have over 1,000 banking professionals that report up into you. I'm sure an incredibly diverse background of individuals. How do you individually, what are some of the things that you do to keep people engaged and connected and all moving toward the same goal?
Yeah, it's a great question, a lot. And gosh, from now on, I'm gonna make sure that the DJ plays everyone's song. I'll never forget that. It's the first time I've heard that analogy, which is really great. But there's a lot we do. As you know, Los Angeles, we all live here, is super diverse. And some of the things that we do, to get there is we work really strategically with recruiting to understand what the makeup of our local demographics looks like in the areas around all of our branches, to be sure we're cultivating, hiring. We do workforce share development programs with local nonprofits. And it's our employees teaching people, what is it like to work at a bank? What is a bank all about? How do they operate? And then resume writing, interview skills workshops we do as well. But what we notice as we do that, we start giving people a voice in the interview process, because that really becomes the first day on the job, is when you interview for a job. And when you have that confidence, then you come into the organization with a voice, with a sharing of ideas, doing a lot of different things that help and benefit us who we are locally from a D&I perspective. I talked about the team member networks earlier, and we have 10 team member networks in Los Angeles, and those include Latino women, my generation, Pride, Black, African American, Asian American, Native peoples, diverse abilities, and more. And every quarter I host what's called a Team Member Network Forum, and that brings together the voices of those 10 collective team member networks that serve and cover not only Los Angeles, but Southern California. And they get to collaborate, talk about strategic work that they're doing here at work or in the communities. And while it's been virtual work in the communities for the last year, it was always sort of grassroots and feet to the street before that. But I provide a forum for the ideas that they share, the things that they talk about, what's important for us, and it gives them a voice, but us as a company, the perspective and the insight that we need to make good decisions in this space. that I can work with colleagues and executives on that are in Southern California and bubble up to the rest of the organization, which makes a difference. But that's a really powerful place I've noticed where people's voice gets to come out.
Very good, thank you. I want to continue with focusing on the individual here and what organizations do to really be an ally for the individual. In my experience, oftentimes the minority employee is oftentimes first generation college in their family. They can't, they are not getting the same coaching about performance reviews, negotiating salary, planning their careers from their home that people that are second or third generation. So what do you do both organizationally and individually to help support these individuals? We'll go to Ken and then to Dr. Kyle. Ken, please.
Yeah, Tom, that's a great question. And I love the concept of allyship, right? Because really it's a unique way to really take action in investing your time in engaging in conversations around racial equity and diversity and inclusion. And just a few examples of how you can demonstrate your support would include, supporting racial equity efforts with your talent, time, and treasure, making lifestyle and personal choices that reflect your passion for equity, working on personal interactions with all people of color, so your behavior does not reflect unconscious bias, and intervening if you witness racially problematic statements or behaviors. And so the concept of allyship and being an ally, it's really important because that's where I think you're going to get the most, not just social, but also institutional and organizational impact.
Thank you. And Dr. Kyle?
Yeah, I believe that it's very important, first of all, to have a strong mentorship program, which we have. I'm a mentor. We have other of my staff that are mentors, and we're mentoring other people, internship programs. We're talking to young men and women coming into the industry. Also, we've organized in our organization a steering committee. We call our Equity Steering Council. There are 3 sub-councils that report to that, which is our member council, our provider and vendor council, and our team council. And the team council is most responsible for actually inculcating and listening to what our members are saying, what our staff are really talking about and what their issues are. We just started a book club, for instance, an equity book club. And the first book that's now being read for the next month and a half is White Fragility. And it's going to be a mentored conversation about that book and what it means to our organization. We try to scan what's going on in the community. We just recently released our statement on anti-Asian hate crimes and our stand as an organization on that to speak to that community. And we've done other statements that have been publicly released looking at various trends in politics and governance that impact people. So I think that we have to be an organization that stands for something, an organization that is clear that our vision and our goals are being mirrored in our actions and our behaviors. And that's where we're trying to go.
How impressive when I hear you talk about the book club, the individual participation that really brings it home to each individual is very impressive and a great idea. So thank you. Dr. Kyle, I want to stay and start with you on this next question because it's about the vast difference between just supporting diversity and inclusion and the individual that wants to build a legacy of being an advocate. What advice do you have for early in career, mid-career managers who want to build a legacy of driving an agenda of diversity and inclusion and equity?
I think the first piece of advice I would give would be humility. Recognize that there's so much about this field that you maybe do not know. So you need to be reading voraciously around all the material you put your hands on, talking to people who are fellow colleagues in the area of DEI, and recognizing that there's always a lot to learn. I think secondly, you have to have courage. You have to believe that what you're doing is the right thing and you have to trust your organization that they're going to support you in moving forward. There are many DEI stories of sacrifice, where people have tried to lead out and wound up being sacrificed along the way because their organization was not ready to follow. So I think it's going to be very important early in the process to speak to senior leadership, hear where they're coming from, and know that you're actually in an organization where you can safely lead. It's important that you gauge what the bandwidth of your organization is to embrace change. If you run too far ahead, you'll crash and burn. If you run too slow, nothing will ever be accomplished. So it's about monitoring and measuring how far you can go in that organization towards creative change. Go for low-hanging fruit. Don't try to boil the ocean, and try to get the most you can out of purposeful action and deliverables that build confidence in the organization that indeed DEI is possible for that organization.
So Dr. Kyle, when you talk about monitoring and measuring the change, what are some of the low frequency signals you look for to indicate that your agenda is either getting traction or that you need to adjust course?
I think you monitor by how your activities and your proposals are being met. If every proposal you put together is rejected or criticized, then you know the organization is not quite ready. I think you have to also look at data. Give up the HR department and pull data on diversity and inclusion in your organization. Where are the jobs? How are people being hired? Where are they working? If the entire C-suite is all male and all white, then you know you've got some work to do to get that C-suite to embrace where you're going. One of the things we're doing, we're about to start a culture of humility and DEI training, and our entire C-suite has volunteered to go for 2.5 days of this training. Their training will be deeper than anyone else in the organization because it's important that they embrace and that they understand what we're trying to do, and that will open up the door for everybody else in the organization to move forward. So I think you have to really have some real crucial conversations with people and listen to what they're really saying and listen to what they're not saying.
Incredibly impressive. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. I want to stay with supporting people and becoming an advocate and really building a legacy of that. Michael and Ken, would you share your thoughts also? We'll go to Michael first.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You know, I think in a couple things I think about in becoming an advocate, leaders have the responsibility to objectively lead D&I or DE&I, excuse me. But to me, it's really about walking the walk and talking the talk. And so you can understand the structure and the framework around it. But being an advocate is really, what do people notice about you when you're not looking or when they're not talking about the topic specifically? And I think of leaders and managers in your day-to-day job function. There are issues that come up at times that sort of bleed into the DE&I space, and how a leader reacts and responds to that shows your true colors. It either confirms an unconscious bias that you may or may not have had. It confirms other people's unconscious bias of you that they may or may not have had, or takes those away. And, you know, it changes their mind on that based on how you do that. And I think really using resources, leveraging whatever support folks have from a human resource perspective, or employee assistance before making a final decision, and not reacting with gut, but to take in all perspectives. The other thing that comes to mind is that idea of looking at all perspectives. We always naturally think of how we see the world, what our framework has been, how we grew up. I'm the son of 2 immigrant parents and an LGBT person. So I think from there initially in decisions I make. And then I start to think through all of the other layers of diversity and making good decisions and what people's perspectives are. And if I can't answer that question, I'll go and ask the question to people, or put a listening session together and get insight and input from others. But when doing that, the important thing is don't give your perspective. Ask the questions and let people speak, because what you want to hear is what you don't know. So those are some things that come to mind for me in helping folks become an advocate.
Very good, thank you. And Michael?
I think you meant Ken. So I'll go ahead and go. And
Apologies, yes.
No problem, no problem. Well, you know, Tom, at RSM, we, like many other organizations, we have values, a set of values, but we also have a very succinct list of behaviors that help us align with those values. And from a diversity and inclusion perspective, when I look at the set of behaviors that we look for employees to demonstrate every day, it really weaves in well with, you know, advancing the D&I agenda, if you will, and what a mid-level manager and anybody in their careers should think about as they think about how are they going to leave a legacy. So let me just share with you a little bit about those behaviors. We call them the 5 C's, right? So the first one is caring. You have to show care, right? You have to really show empathy, you know, with all the diverse groups. You have to be curious, right? You're not going to get a level of understanding, a good level of understanding, if you're not curious, right? So that's asking questions. Again, we talked about allyship. Part of that is being curious. Critical thinkers. You know, as you grow in your careers, you develop your set of experiences, your seniority, so on and so forth. You have the critical thinking that you may not have had as you first started your career. And so that critical thinking will generate some ideas that would really help move the strategic priority along. Collaboration, you know, doing what we're doing right now. I don't think there's a one size fits all. You know, none of us went to school for D&I, right? So the way we learn is we collaborate with each other, you know, with our peers, within our communities, etc. And also the last C is courageous, right? You have to be courageous. We hold many courageous conversations, and that's for us to really develop a deeper understanding that allows an avenue for people to voice their concerns, talk about their feelings, and also provide leadership with feedback on how to improve on the agenda, if you will. So, so I think that would be my advice, Tom.
Very good, thank you. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to skip to our last question about detrimental behaviors. Every organization creates a purpose, they create mission statements, they have to list of values, but oftentimes the top performer on the business side is the prima donna that destroys all the company's messages and belief in those values because there's no consequences for the detrimental behavior. Could you real quickly share thoughts on the detrimental behaviors toward any cultural change and the implications that you take in your organization? We'll start with you, Dr. Kyle, if we could.
Well, I think you start off by hiring the attitude. The skill set can be taught, but people who come into your organization with bad attitudes, it's hard to retrain a bad attitude. In terms of that detrimental behavior, I think it takes the courage of leadership to address that, to try to do what can be done to remediate. But if it can't be remediated, you got to remove it. Detrimental behavior on the part of, especially of a leader, is poisonous to the organization. The organizational culture will be ruined by that. And if you want to create a culture of inclusion and a culture of equity, then the serial abusers of that inside the organization have to either be corralled in to understand how they're putting themselves, their careers at danger, or they need to be removed from the organization.
Very good. Michael?
Yeah, what comes to mind here for me, I talked a little bit about it earlier, is being an incredible listener, gaining perspective from teams, and not putting out there what you want to hear or what you want people to say, but really developing thoughts and ideas from those that are involved, that you've gained to be involved in creating strategy, and then listening and setting forth objectives. Ken talked about how none of us went to school for DE&I, and we learn it as we go and collaborate, and that's so true. But what's so important from there is that decisions are made on what to do next and to move forward with that. But I think if you miss out on really capturing the voice of the team, you'll miss out on where true root cause issues are and enable you to move forward.
Very good. I'm getting a text that we're pretty much out of time. We probably have 1 minute. I think we'll just close it here rather than try to squeeze things into a 10-second comment. Dr. Kyle, Ken, Michael, thank you. From what I've heard today, your teams are fortunate to be led by people so well grounded and so well experienced as you, as I think your organizations are very fortunate. I will turn it back to Josh and thank everyone for joining us on Zoom.
Well, thank you so much. What a great way to close out our discussions today. So many great thoughts in there. I really appreciate the actionable takeaways that we just heard. So thank you so much to Tom, Michael, Ken, and Dr. Kyle. Next week, we welcome and encourage you, if you're on this call still and you're looking to learn more about businesses who are doing it right, join us for our awards program. We're going to be unveiling companies and leaders who've put a lot of today's topics into action, and they're truly leading by example. So as a reminder, I do want to let you know that Monday's print and digital editions will highlight today's event, and there will also be a recorded version of each of the panels that you've seen today available up on our website by the end of this week, and that's labusinessjournal.com. Thank you all for being here. Let's continue the conversation in person, in print, online, as much as we can. We look forward to seeing you next week to celebrate and honor some amazing people and companies. Thank you. Be safe.